So what, that's like three and a half math. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my reading stats from 2024. So this is a video that I usually do every year. So I thought for those of you who are like me and stats brained, you might enjoy this. So I'm just going to go through the spreadsheet that I have on my computer here. And it's actually part of G's Copile spreadsheets that she creates. And so I'll just go through how my reading went, just a few stats here and there. And then we can go through all the books that I read this year. So get cozy, get a cup of your favorite whatever drink, get a snack, because I don't know how long this is going to take, but we have some stats to go over. So let's dive in. So I've got my screen recording so we can see what we've got. So this year I read a total of 130 books, but that is with DNFs. Without DNFs, I read 127. So considering how many books that is, I think that's pretty good. The fact that I only had 3 DNFs last year, incredible. I think 2025 may be a little bit different. I just have this feeling that I'm going to be pickier on the books that I read. I only read things that I'm going to love, but we can never actually predict that, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's how many I read, which of course was well over my Goodreads goal. I think I set it for 100, so yay me. Looking at the books per month, the month I read the most books in was April, and I'm not even sure why that is, because March is when I did my manga video. So March is a close second with 21 books, but like, I don't know what happened. I mean, like, I know April was the magical readathon, at least the first part of the magical readathon, but like, I'm now gonna go back and see what March, because like there's a ton in March, but like there was a ton in April. I mean, oh, I know what happened. I think that's probably, looking back on what I read, that is when I discovered Lumberjanes, which I haven't actually read any more of since then, I think. But I discovered it, I feel like the end of March, maybe? I don't know. When we go through the books, I can tell you for sure. Maybe, yeah, because I started April with the 3rd volume. So I definitely read a bunch of those. But those are graphic novels, so I would get through those relatively quickly. But as you can see through the trajectory of the year, I read a lot at the beginning of the year, and then something crazy happened in the middle of the summer, like, I don't know, giving birth, and my reading dipped a lot, which is totally fine. It's what I expected. The fact that I read anything, like, there's some months like September, October, I'm in the double digits there, which is amazing. I was expecting to read 2 or 3 books the entirety of the rest of the year. So the fact that I was able to read a good amount in my lowest month was November with 3 books. I'll tell that as a win, because that's still 3 books. That's still a good amount of books. I remember my very first wrap up on this channel. I don't know what was in it, but I know that there were 3 books in it. So look where we've come. So yeah, books as a whole, it's sloped down, but that's just going to be I think the trajectory for this entire year. Is I read a lot at the beginning, knowing that middle of the year life was going to change and things were going to happen. So still very happy with this. Looking at the pages per month, this trajectory is pretty, I would say, similar to how many books I read. I read a total of 39,960 pages, and if you're counting audiobooks, I read 1,038 hours, or I listened to 1,038 hours. April still, of course, has the biggest amount of pages, just like it has the most amount of books. The second largest was March. Looking at the third largest, still February, just like the amount of books. So it stayed pretty pretty average actually. When you look at like the number of books versus pages, sometimes it doesn't always align, but it looks like this year it did. So DNFs, I did one in March, one in July, and one in October, so they're pretty spread out. And then here's my hours listened. The biggest month that I read or listened to audiobooks was February, with 223 hours. So while the first half still has the most amount of hours listened, it was not the months that had the most pages and the most books, because those were mostly due to graphic novels and mangas, which I wouldn't be listening to audiobooks for, so that makes sense. The main reason for DNFing, sorry, I'm going back to DNFing here, was actually they each had a different reason. Low intrigue, general apathy, and then everything was sucky. So like usually when I DNF books, this is pretty normal for me, usually when I DNF books, it's because it's an overall apathy feeling, like there wasn't anything amazing in it that made me want to read. There's usually not like a glaring, this book sucks because I hate the writing, or this character is problematic, or like there's not usually anything like that that causes me to, or the books that I DNF, it's usually, that's not the reason. It's usually just like an overall meh feeling about them. All right, reading languages, obviously everything was in English. That's what I know. Reading method. So the biggest chunk was a mixed media format, or not mixed media, was just like a mixed format, which usually just means I had the audiobook and either the physical or the ebook that I was also following along with. The next biggest is audiobooks at 27%. Sorry, the mixed one was at 39%, which is pretty big. Physical books at 19 and ebooks at 13. So pretty normal, pretty average, makes sense for me. I listen to audiobooks. It's how I get through things, honestly. I don't have a ton of time to physically read, but when I do, it's usually things like mangas and graphic novels. Rereads, I actually didn't have any rereads this past year. Sometimes I have one or two. I don't reread a ton, but when I do, it's only a couple. So I didn't have any this past year. Series versus standalone, I read more series than standalones. I read 73% of the books that I read, which was 95 were part of a series, and 26% were were not part of a series. Let's see, I started, this is a fun new fact, series you started this year. I started 37 new series, very exciting. I read 41 sequels. I finished 17 series according to this, and I decided to DNF 12. I'll talk about series maybe later in a different video, but I read a lot of sequels, so that's exciting. And that was definitely, I think, a goal from this past year. So I did pretty well on that. And then there was a section of like whether it was for a book club or a buddy read, and then for readathons and vlogs. So I had 5 books for book clubs and 62 books for readathons. So, or vlogs. Obviously the book clubs, I'm realizing I didn't put in the book club that I had, that I've joined within the middle of the year, so that one definitely should be added here. But according to this, I only did my Heath buddy read with my friends, and then I also did some buddy reads with my friend Teresa. But I'm thinking there should be at least 5 books in here that are book club reads. Maybe less, because a couple of them would have been rereads and I decided not to reread them. So maybe like 2 or 3 more could have been added to there. And then as far as readathons / vlogs go, obviously the biggest chunk at 42% is Magical Readathon, which happens in April, and then it usually happens in August, but she changed it to September last year and is thinking about keeping it there, and I would be very much on board with that. So they might change, but either way, that's twice a year. So obviously 26 books were read for that. And then the next biggest chunk was the manga vlog that I did. I read 13. Sorry, I can't read. I read 11 books for that. Then we had a few books for Simplify My Series. I did a few books for the Hyped Books Chronicles that I did. I did do the 12 and 12 last episode, which was a continuation from 2023. So I didn't actually finish it in that year, so I finished the next one. I started my 30 Before 30 vlog series, so those are in there. I did participate in Spookopolython, so that's there. I did a vlog about books that I shouldn't like. So there were a few extra vlogs and fun things like that, but obviously the biggest chunk was Magical Refund, which doesn't surprise me. All right, genre. This does not surprise me in the slightest. The biggest genre at 50% with 66 books was fantasy. And it usually switches like back and forth between which one's the biggest between fantasy and romance. Romance is my second this month or this year with 29%. But this past year, I just was in the mood for fantastical things. And then I had like a weird thriller phase in the middle of the year, but like romance was part of books, but it wasn't like the biggest chunk. So this does not surprise me. Sometimes romance is number one, and this past year just wasn't it. But some other bigger chunks, I read a lot of thriller at 8%. I consider thriller mystery to be the same, so I think next year I've changed the way that this works and just made them the same genre because mystery's at 3% and I just consider them the same. But then I read about a few books that were contemporary, a few books that were science fiction, and a few books that were historical fiction. It looks like 1 or 2 books for each of those sections. And I read across 9 different genres, which is exciting. Book length, pretty normal. The biggest chunk was between 350 and 400 pages. That has been the same, I think, every single year on BookTube. I just don't read a lot of big chunks. Now, I clearly did because, as you can see, there's an outlier over here at 800 pages, which, if I remember correctly, was Priory of the Orange Tree. And then I had a few within the 500 and 600 range, but the biggest chunk was obviously the 350 to 400, and that's just my comfort zone. It's short. It's not too short. It's not too long. It's just that in between. A lot of the books that I read fall within that. And the next biggest chunk is between 100 and 150 with 20 books. And that's probably those mangas and graphic novels that I read at the beginning of the year. So book length doesn't surprise me. Moving down to a few more things, we have the book format. So this is whether or not it was a standard novel or if it was like a graphic novel or manga. Obviously, the biggest chunk with 63% is novels. I read novels more than anything else, but I did read a few graphic novels at 15%, mangas at 14%. I did read a short story, I guess. I'm trying to remember what that was, but I read a short story apparently, or at least a couple, and then I read about 6 novellas. And I remember those were like, there's a few that were like included in like as prequels as part of series and things like that. So those are honestly, these are the sections I read. So short stories, I'm surprised is in there because I don't really read those, so I need to go back and figure out what that is. But novels, graphic novels, mangas, and novellas are really the only things that I read consistently. Looking at the original origin, like the original language, obviously most of the books that I read are written originally in English at 86%. I'm realizing that I can't spell because Japanese is on here twice, and one of them is spelled correctly, and one of them is very much not. But over that, that's the only other language that I would have been translated from, and that's those mangas. I read a lot of mangas, so I read 18 mangas over the course of this past year that would have been translated from Japanese into English. All right. Publishers. This graph always looks ridiculous because I have so many random itty bitty publishers, and I'm never quite sure how to do this graph because sometimes I think, oh, I'll just do like the parent company, but everyone's their own imprint and I don't want to mess anything up. But the biggest chunk, I believe, if I can read this correctly, is Bloom, which is that graphic novel. So that's what I believe Lumberjanes is released under, and that was at least 11 or 12 volumes that I read last year. So not all of those are Lumberjanes, but that's a big one. And then I'm thinking the other one is Penguin, but I genuinely can't tell what some of these are. This graph is very confusing, but those would be the graphic novels. And considering I read a lot of series and a lot of the same series, and it would have been released by the same place, that doesn't surprise me. But I need to figure out a better way to do this graph because this is ridiculously confusing, and like not a lot has been like you can't tell what some of these are. So if you have a suggestion on how to do that, let me know. Moving on to the books and how I acquired them. The biggest chunk, actually, surprisingly, is not owned. I usually read a lot of owned books, but this year I read 43% of the things I read came from the library, which is awesome. Now, this includes books that I physically got from the library. This includes books that I got from the library and I didn't already own, like, I got the audiobook from the library and I didn't have a physical copy. Like, I didn't own a physical copy, because if I own a physical copy, even if I'm listening to the audiobook from the library, I consider that an owned book. So this is a lot of, like, I didn't spend a lot of money on things this year. I mean, I did, but, like, I didn't spend a ton of money on things like I have in the past, which is good. And then, of course, the second biggest would have been owned with 36%. I'm trying to get better at writing what came from a book box because I would always forget to put that down. But 10% of the books that I read came from book boxes. I got a few ARCs, so I read those. And I did actually read a few things from Kindle Unlimited, so I put those there as well. All right, ratings. We have star ratings on one side and then star ratings and half stars on the other. So if you're looking at just like whole stars, there's that graph, but I'm going to talk about the ones with half stars because I use those a lot. So the biggest chunk is not really a surprise to me, which is a 4-star at 29%. The next biggest chunk actually is a surprise to me, which is a 3.5-star at 24%, 24.5%. Then you go to 4.5 stars, 5 stars, 3 stars, and I did have a couple of 2 stars. And I'm thinking one of those tiny little slivers that doesn't have a marker is like the DNFs, because I did have obviously a couple of those and I don't rate those. So I had a lot of, like, I'm a 4-star queen. I rate a lot of things 4 to 4.5 stars. So I suspected either 4 or 4.5 would be the most and the other one would be the second. So the fact that it is not the second largest is interesting. I think I was more critical of my ratings and I gave more things 3.5 stars, clearly, because I would enjoy it, but I think about it and go, it's not, as good as this other book that I gave a 4-star to. So I think I thought about that a little bit more. Oh, and there's a little note right here that says my average rating this year was a 4. So that makes sense. Some other random things that we have in here is age category. The biggest chunk of things that I read were adult books at 44%. The next one was YA at 29%. Then we have 18% middle grade and 7% new adult. Doesn't surprise me. I read a lot more adult books than anything else. And then I do read YA next. I read very little middle grade last year, and new adult is such a weird age category that I'm never quite sure what actually fits in it. So there's probably some YA and adult that could have been in the new adult section, but according to Goodreads, they were not new adult, and that's kind of what I went by. In publication year, it looks like the biggest chunk of books that I read came from the previous year of 2023 with 16, almost 17%. Then the next biggest was actually the current year of, well, not the current year, but the current year of reading, which is 2024 at 14.5%. And then we go 2022 with 12%. And then I read some things in 2016, 2020, 18, 19, 17, like some of the other ones. And there's some other ones thrown in there as well, but those are the ones that have markers. So I read a lot of newer things, which, considering I think last year's the year I started the Hyped Vlogs series, makes sense because I would read things that were hyped, and usually they're hyped because they're new. So that doesn't surprise me. Looking at the rep, it's always not as good as I want it to be. I can always do better. But we'll do the LGBTQ plus rep first. Over half the books I read didn't include it in some way. But the chunk of things that was present at 37%, I am almost positive that that is up from last year. So we're going in the right direction, which is good. And then 11% was main character. So present is like, it's in the world or the story, but it's not the main character. And then the breakdown of that is like, I have it broken down as like, if there's only one sexuality represented, then obviously I will do that. But if there's more than one, then I just write multiple. So I don't know what each book has unless I just happen to remember. But that's the easiest way for me to do it here. So the biggest chunk was female, actually, with 35%. Then the next one was just multiple, which means that there was obviously multiple different forms, which 33%. Then we had male romances at 25%, and bi representation at 3%. So it's actually interesting. I expected multiple to be the biggest, just because that's like the catch-all almost, but it wasn't. All right, looking at disability rep, this one's harder for me to, like, it's hard for me to add things unless it's very, very clear that there's disability rep in it, because it's usually not described, I guess, is the way that I'm not doing a very good way of describing this myself. But anyway, it's easier for me to find LGBTQ rep than disability rep, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So that is why 88% of the books that I read did not have it in there, because I didn't know if it was going to be in there or not until I started reading the book. 8% present, 3% was the main character. Then the breakdown of that. Sometimes these are general, sometimes they're not. 46% of the books that I read that had disability rep were some form of physical disability. Then we had hearing, I included chronic illness as well as a disability. I'm not necessarily sure how PC that is to actually include, but I wanted to include whether or not chronic illness and things like that were, like anxiety, I would consider a disability for the sake of this graph, so that I could figure out which ones had anxiety rep and things like that. So that's why you see a wide range here of random things. But sometimes I would clump them into whether it was a hearing disability, physical, or speech disability, and then if it was something else very specific, that's when I would break them down that way. Moving on to author. Again, not exactly where I wanted it to be, but as far as whether or not it's a POC author, 75% of the books I read, it was not. 25% of it was. Again, I think this is up from last year, but again, not where I want it to be. And then the breakdown of that representation, the biggest chunk was an Asian author, and that's probably because I had so many mangas. I mean, there are other things that I read that definitely were by Asian authors, but that's why that's the biggest chunk, because I read a lot of manga last year. And then the next biggest is Latina authors. The gender of the authors. The biggest chunk with 67% was women, which does not surprise me, because the stories I gravitate towards, usually written by women. I feel like it's very common for you to gravitate towards stories written by people who are the gender that you are. I feel like that's, maybe without even meaning to, that's pretty common. So that's why I think I have so many. Then 13% were multiple authors, which means that, like, there was more than one author. I don't know why I needed to explain that. 10% were written by men and 5% were not specified. I know that there's a little 4 there that doesn't have anything next to it. I'm pretty sure that's non-binary authors, because they did have a few. So that's one of those, and that looks like the only one that doesn't have a little marker. And then as far as nationality, 56% of the authors I read are from America. Makes sense. The next biggest chunk was from England. Again, makes sense. I'm obsessed with things like Regency England and stuff like that. So those are probably going to be written by British authors, but I do enjoy British writing too, so it's a mixture. Anyway, that's 18%, and then 14% were from Japan. Again, those mangas. 3% were from Canada, 2% were from Australia. There's a few more in there. I think I read some books for someone from New Zealand. There's a few other random things, but those are the biggest one. And then whether or not it was a repeat author or not, the biggest chunk was from authors I've read from before, which was 66%, and the new to me authors were 33%. So that's pretty exciting. And then looking at the crazy, this is the last one, the crazy author one here. This is the biggest chunk of books written by one author. And I think the biggest one, I'm double checking here, the biggest one is by Core Amazaki, sorry. And if I remember correctly, I think that is the Mage's Bride series. And then obviously, like, I read a lot of Lorraine Heath, Emily Henry, Christina Lauren, Ellie Hazelwood. I read a lot of Ben Alderson. Well, I read 3 books of his in a row, so that's probably why he's showing up. Holly Jackson, I read 4 of her books, which is why she's showing up. And there's a couple of random ones here and there, but I read a lot of wide range. Like, it wasn't like I picked one author and read a ton from that one author. It was like, even though, like, you can kind of see, like, I have Jeff Lemire and Dustin Le Guin up there. It doesn't show it, but I read like 2 books from them, so that's probably why they're showing up as a thing here. But usually there's not such a big chunk unless I've been doing a buddy read, and I didn't really do a lot of that last year. So this one is pretty spread out when you think about it, which is kind of cool. And I read from a total of 96 different authors. So one last stat I thought it'd be kind of interesting to look at is the little section right here that says something about new books. Now, this is going to be sad because I tried to keep track of everything that I bought last year. What I have done is I added a couple of things here which talked about whether or not I'd read that book this year, whether I'd read it and then hauled it, or, you know, whatever. And then this is for me as far as like the month it was read in. But over here, you can see I bought 81 books last year, which sounds like a lot, but this is way down from previous years. So I am actually really excited about this number. And of those, I read 25. So not a great chunk, but also, like, there are some books that we purchased that weren't for me, they were for Chris. Or like, we've been buying a lot of picture books, obviously, for Peanut. And then of those 81 books, I only spent under $300, so $288. Now, I will say, the used book warehouse that's near us, that I go to all the time, I do not count the prices of those books because we have sold so many books there that we spend store credit. And so we haven't actually bought things with cash or money in years because we just keep using the store credit and we keep selling books back. So it's like this ongoing cycle. And then when we moved into this apartment, we got rid of a lot of things. So we have a ridiculous amount of store credit. So even though I purchased a lot of books that way, I'll count those as zero since I didn't spend money on them. That's why the price is very different compared to how many I got, just for reference. And if you look over here, like, you can see the prices and then there's a bunch of zeros. That's what that is. Anyway, I was very good. Last year, I tried to not buy very much. A, because I knew we were moving. B, because for the first half of the year, I was unemployed and we were trying to save money. And also, I just, like, don't need those. That's probably why I use the library so much. It's just like, we did not need to be buying it. Well, I did not need to be buying what I was buying. So that's why December is the biggest month, because yes, there's Christmas. We did go to the used book warehouse for the first time in a while. So that's why that one felt like it jumped up real big there. But otherwise, it was like some months were more than others, but we were pretty solid for most of that, and I am very proud of myself there. And then we do have formats, so like most of the books, 96% of the books that are charted here were physical buys. I did also chart things like if I bought an ebook or if I bought an audiobook, I would chart that here as well. But mostly this is just my physical book buying. So that's a look at that. So those are the stats. I think overall a pretty good year. I read some good things. I think I had some interesting months. The fact that I thought my reading was going to disappear after having a kid, and it hasn't, is very exciting for me. But now that we've gone through the stats, let's go through month by month all the books that I read in 2024. Let me go set up in a better spot, and then we'll go through all of them. Starting out the year, my very first read in January was the 5th book in the Percy Jackson series of The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan, which I gave 4 stars. The Inadequate Heir, which is the 3rd in the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle L. Jensen, which I gave 3.5 stars. Freeing Luca II in the Clicanian series by Victoria Aveline, which I gave 4.5 stars. Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, which I gave 5 stars. And the first 2 volumes of Lumberjanes by N.D. Stevenson, which I gave 3 stars. Starting out in February, I had The War of Two Queens by Jennifer L. Armentrout, the 4th in the Blood and Ash series, which I gave 4 stars. Any Day with You by May Respicio, which I gave 3.5 stars. The Measure by Nikki Erlich, which I gave 5 stars. The Forbidden Wish by Jessica Corey, which I gave 3.5 stars. Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna McGuire, the 9th in the Wayward Children series, which I gave 4.5 stars. One to Watch by Kate Stayman London, which I gave 4 stars. A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber, the 3rd and final book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, which I gave 4 stars. Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert, which I gave 4.5 stars. The Expectation to the Rule, the first in the Improbable Meet Cute series by Christina Lauren, which I gave 4 stars. The first volume of Ascender, The Haunted Galaxy by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, which I gave 3.5 stars. Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which I gave 4.5 stars. The Assassin's Blade and Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, which I gave 4.5 and 5 stars. A Rogue in Texas, the first in the Rogue in Texas series by Lorraine Heath, which I gave 4.5 stars. The second volume of Ascender, The Dead Sea by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, which I gave 4 stars. The Marriage Bureau by Penrose Halson, which I gave 3.5 stars. A Lily at Ludgate Hall by Mimi Matthews, the 3rd in the Bells of London series, which I gave 4.5 stars. Starting out in March, I read Shadow of Night and Book of Life, which was 2 and 3 in the All Souls series by Deborah Harkness, which I gave 3 and 4 stars. One Wish by Michelle Harrison, the prequel in the 13 Treasures series, which I gave 4 stars. The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary, which I gave 4 stars. The One by John Mars, which I gave 4.5 stars. The Gentleman's Gamut by Evie Dunmore, which is the 4th and final book in the Extraordinary Women's series, A League of Extraordinary Women, which I gave 3 stars. The first volume of Kiki's Delivery Service, which I gave 4 stars. The first volume of Natsumi's Book of Friends, which I gave 3 stars. The first volume of Perfect World by Ri Aruga, which I gave 4.5 stars. A Sign of Affection by Sue Morishita, which I gave 4 stars. The first volume of Maid Sama, which I gave 2 stars. First volume of Happy Marriage by Maki Njoji, which I gave 4.5 stars. The first volume of Kasumi, which I gave 3.5 stars. The first volume of After Hours by Yuki Nishio, which I gave 3 stars. The first volume of The Ancient Mage's Bride, which I gave 4.5 stars. The first volume of Love is a Foreign Language, which I gave 3 stars. The first volume of Promised Neverland, which I gave 4 stars. The Ladies Rewrite the Rules by Suzanne Elaine, which I gave 4 stars. Never Love a Cowboy, the 2nd in the Rogues in Texas series by Lorraine Heath, which I DNF'd. At about 48%, if you're curious. The second volume of Kasumi, which I rated 4 stars. The Other Bennett's Sister by Janice Hallett, which I gave 4.5 stars. Starting out April, we have the second volume of Cutie and the Beast by Yuhi Azumi, which I gave 4 stars. Foxglove by Adeline Grace, the 2nd in the Belladonna series, which I gave 4.5 stars. Volumes 3 and 4 of Lumberjanes, which I gave 3.5 and 4 stars. An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, which I gave 3 stars. Volumes 5, 6, and 7 of Lumberjanes, which I gave 3.5 and 4 stars. Happy Place by Emily Henry, which I gave 5 stars. Seven Faceless Saints by N.K. Lobb, the first in the Seven Faceless Saints series, which I gave 4.5 stars. Blaze Wrath Games, the first in the Blaze Wrath Games series by Amparo Ortiz, which I gave 3.5 stars. Volumes 9, 10, and 11 of Lumberjanes, which I gave 3.5 and 4 stars. Misrule, the 2nd in the Malice series by Heather Walter, which I gave 4 stars. Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate, which I gave 4 stars. Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren, which I gave 4 stars. To Woo and to Wed by Martha Waters, the 5th and final book in the Regency Vows series, which I gave 4 stars. Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, which is the first in the Maple Hills series, which I gave 4 stars. The Dreamers, which I ended up giving 4 stars. Wings of Fire graphic novel volume 1, which I gave 3 stars. The Rumor Game by John Young Clayton and Sonia Charapotra, which I gave 3.5 stars. Lore Olympus Volume 4, which by Rachel Smith, which I gave 5 stars. Starting out in May, we started with A Fate, Ink, and Blood, the first in the Saga of the Unfated by Danielle L. Denson, which I gave 4 stars. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, the first in that series by Heather Fawcett, which I gave 3.5 stars. The second volume of The Ancient Mage's Bride, which I gave 4.5 stars. Queen of Myth and Monsters, the 2nd in the Adrian and Isolde series by Scarlett St. Clair, which I gave 4 stars. The Antidote for Everything by Kimmery Martin, which I gave 5 stars. The Priory of the Orange Tree, the first in the Roots of Chaos series by Samantha Shannon, which I gave 3.5 stars. Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey, which I gave 4 stars. Heartless Hunter, the first in the Crimson Moth series by Kristen Cicerelli, which I gave 5 stars. The Ancient Mage's Bride, volumes 3 and 4, which I gave 3.5 and 4 stars. In Bed with the Devil, the first in the Scoundrels of St. James series by Lorraine Heath, which I gave 4 stars. The 5th volume of The Ancient Mage's Bride, which I gave 3.5 stars. None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, which I gave 5 stars. Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey, the second in the Bellinger Sisters series, which I gave 4.5 stars. Starting out June, we had Isabel and the Rogue, the second in the Lunar Sisters series by Liana de la Rosa, which I gave 4.5 stars. The 6th volume of Ancient Mage's Bride, which I gave 3 stars. The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, which I gave 4 stars. Disciples of Chaos, the second and final book in the 7 Faceless Saints series by M.K. Lobb, which I gave 4 stars. A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall, which I gave 4 stars. Dark Corners, the second in the Rachel Crowell series by Megan Golden, which I gave 3.5 stars. Starting out July, we have Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose, which I gave 3 stars. Duke Gone Rogue, the first in the Love on Holiday series by Christy Carlisle, which I DNF'd at 50%, if you're curious. Have You Seen This Girl by Nita Tendall, which I gave 3 stars. Casing Kosher by Jean Meltzer, which I gave 4.5 stars. Starting out August, we have Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Rayburn, which I gave 3 stars. The Honeymoon Crashers by Christina Lauren, which is a post novella in that series, which I gave 5 stars. All 3 STEM novellas by Ali Hazelwood, which I gave 4.5 and 5 star and 5 star. Immortality, a love story by Dana Schwartz, the second and final book in the love story series, which I gave 4.5 stars. The Thursday Murder Club, the first in that series by Richard Osman, which I gave 4 stars. Starting out September, we have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, which is actually the 3rd book in the Part of Your World series, which I gave 5 stars. The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill, which I gave 4 stars. The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren, which I gave 3.5 stars. Happily Never After by Lynn Painter, which I gave 5 stars. Sasaki and Miyano, Volume 1, which I gave 2 stars. The Hemlock Queen, the second in the Nightshade Crown series by Hannah Witten, which I gave 3 stars. The Ghosts of Rose Hill by R.M. Romero, which I gave 3 stars. Never a Hero, the second in the Monsters series by Vanessa Lynn, which I gave 5 stars. Practical Magic, the first in that series by Alice Hoffman, which I gave 3 stars. The Last Flight by Julie Clark, which I gave 4 stars. Somewhere Beyond the Sea, the second in the Cerulean Sea Chronicles by TJ Klune, which I gave 5 stars. Starting in October, I read the entirety of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson, which was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which I gave 5. Good Girl, Bad Blood, which I gave 5, As Good as Dead, which I gave 4.5, and the prequel novella Killjoy, which I gave 4. Lights, the third in the Sheets series by Britta Thumler, which I gave 3.5 stars. Wisteria by Adeline Grace, which is the third and final book in the Belladonna series, which I gave 4.5 stars. A Woman in the Library by Solari Gentile, which I DNF'd at about 35%. One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, the entirety of the Serpent King duology by Rachel Gilling, which I gave both 4.5 stars. Queen Bee by Juno Dawson, which is the prequel novella in the HMRC series, which I gave 3.5 stars. In November, I only read the Dragori series by Ben Alderson, which was Cloaked in Shadow, which I gave 4.5, Found in Night, which I gave 4, and Poisoned in Light, which I gave 3.5 stars. And in December, I started out with Ruthless Vows, the second in the Letters of Enchantment series by Rebecca Ross, which I gave 5 stars. Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, which I gave 4 stars. A Winter in New York by Josie Silver, which I gave 5 stars. Where the Mountain Meets the Moon by Grace Lynn, which I gave 4 stars. And the first 3 and only 3 that are currently out in the Lightfall series by Tim Probert, which I gave 3.5, 4, and 4 stars. So that's it. That's a look at my 2024 reading, both in the books and the stats, all that fun stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know all of your thoughts, of course, down below. Let me know some of your stats if you're like me and you keep stats, if there's some things that surprised you about your reading, or just your bookish thoughts. You know, I'm all for it. And if you want to comment something but you're not sure what to comment the book stack, because I have many a book stack around me because of the amount of books that I had to pull for this video. So leave me that emoji. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all that out. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!